And we're on. So thanks everybody for joining the session tonight. I'm Malcolm Boudin, and this session is about my CCDE journey. So Cisco Certified Design Expert, which I'm sure you know that's what it stands for if you're on this session. Otherwise, I'd be a little bit concerned and probably advise you just to just to move on to something else on your Sunday. But the session is going to be about, as I mentioned, my CCDE journey. Everybody's journey is different. Everybody's background, skills and experience are different. The way that you handle exams and things like that, and how you react to things under pressure and all that is different. And that's just because human beings are all different. So this is what it was like for me. These are the things that I struggled with. These are the things that I found okay. But everybody's different. But hopefully you'll see some common traits that other people in the networking industry who have either attempted the CCDE or passed the CCDE will have already, mentioned or talked to you about somewhere, either online on social media or in person. So to give a bit of a background about myself, the slide here pretty much summarises me. I'm a network engineer / designer / architect / consultant / all of the above from Edinburgh in Scotland. I've been in the IT industry since about 2003, where I graduated with a degree in network computing from university, which was actually quite rare back then. There wasn't many networking degrees or security degrees, but there's a lot more of them now, so it's quite a good thing, I think. During that time, since then, I worked in generic IT for probably 4 years before specialising in networking from about 2007. And I've worked at various enterprises, from small to medium enterprises to global fortune companies, VARs, ISPs, in all of the different roles which are kind of highlighted down here. So I am Cisco CCDE certified in 2017, the 29th of August 2017 to be precise. So I'm literally around 3 years since I passed the exam. And without going on and on about myself and what I've done and all the rest of it, I took a pretty logical path. I know the certifications have changed, but I passed my CCNA in about 2006. Passed my Ccde after that, I don't even know when, 2008 I think. Then 2009 or 10, or maybe a bit later actually, 2010 I think I passed my CCNP. And I don't have a CCIE, but I do have CCDP. So I basically went through associate, professional in both the implementation. I've got CCNA, CCNP, CCDA, CCDP, and I obtained CCDE without having a CCIE. So I don't think there's many people in the world who have done that, but Cisco don't really release the numbers on that anyway, so I'm not entirely sure, but I only know of a handful of people that are in that position. So over the years in my career, I've deployed and designed, so pretty much everything that I've designed, I've also implemented. So that's across the technology stack, mainly on Cisco technology, but I've also worked with many other vendors' solutions across LAN, WAN, security, wireless, data center, load balancing, ISP, peering, MPLS core, and more recently IoT, SD-WAN, both from an implementation, consultancy and an architecture perspective. So that's me in a nutshell. The agenda for today, I'm going to talk a little bit about why I chose to do the CCDE and when I chose to do it in my career, what my approach was to the CCDE written exam, and there'll be some lessons learned that I'll share with you about this. What I done, the approach that I took with the CCDE practical exam, there's definitely some lessons learned that I can share with you there. The resources that I used, I'll try to talk about the resources that I used, but there's so many that you can use. And in my opinion, part of the problem of passing this exam can potentially be you use too many resources. So there's lots of great stuff now. When I started my CCDE path in 2015, I think my first attempt, which I failed, was in November 2015, which I'll get more onto that in a little while. The only resources that were available at that time was Jeremy Philbin bootcamp and exams. That was it. That was the only. Everything else was basically you had to go and find the information. So there was no CCDE study resources. I think INE had done one CCDE bootcamp where they wrote 2 or 3 exams, I think. But it wasn't really like a full bootcamp. It was like, these are the exams, go and try them. And I think there was some slides actually as well, so it probably was a boot camp. I don't know, I can't remember. It was so long ago that I'd done it now. But my point is that there's a lot more resources now than there was back then. And the first actual CCDE resource that came out was the CCDE study guide from Marwan Al-Shawi, who's a great guy, very helpful as well. And he's actually one of the other CCDEs that doesn't have a CCIE that I know about. But that isn't like a book that you read and then you pass the exam. There's so many resources that you can use, and you just have to navigate those and be able to navigate those in order to be successful, I think. And then we'll cover off some of the advice and the battle scars that I've got, which are many. So why did I choose the CCDE? The first thing, I've already mentioned this, so I never done the CCIE, and if you want to know why I didn't do the CCIE, I'd been in the industry since 2003. I started off as a generic or a generalist in IT support. Started off on the service desk, done that for about 18 months, then moved into a field engineer. So that was going around sites, setting up IT, routers, switches, PCs, printers, laptops, re-imaging machines, the whole IT, installing small servers at branch offices, but not really anything deep. It was more generic IT from about 2003 till 2005, probably late 2005. And then I started getting into a bit more into networking, studying from a CCNA, and in 2007 or so, I moved into a more network administrator focused role. The job really just entailed LAN, like Nortel LAN switching, and the Nortel LAN switching and the whole wide area network, which was the only other networking stuff really, was outsourced to a WAN provider. And the security stuff was outsourced. It was all checkpoint security, and F5. So that was all outsourced to a managed security service provider. And I just wasn't hands-on enough in that role in order to do the CCIE. And then when I moved into the roles after that, like it was for a construction company for the first 6 years of my career. After that, I moved into Atos. I worked for Atos, who are a data center outsourcing company, for like 2 years, and that was really focused on the data center. But to be honest, there wasn't a lot of deep routing and there was a lot of switching, but there wasn't a lot of routing. So you would set up some BGP stuff, you'd get the odd project here and there to do AS prepend or something like that. But it was mainly like setting up VLANs, plumbing into firewalls and switches and things like that. And there was very little on more advanced topics like deep BGP, OSPF, multi-area, that kind of thing. So it never really made sense for me to spend the amount of time that was required to do a CCIE. So if you fast forward to 2015, at this point I had like 13 years in IT and 8 years in networking, specific to networking. And that's when I decided to do CCDE. The reason that I done it was mainly this one. I wanted an expert level certification, but by this time I was actually, in 2015, I was working at a small company, but they were a gold Cisco partner, or they were actually silver, and they were going to gold because the silver certification level was going away. And they had 3 CCIEs or 2 CCIEs, and they needed to fill the remaining posts. And he said, would you consider? I said, look, when I negotiated a role with them, I said, I want to get an expert level certification. And he said, okay, well, we've got other people who were sponsoring towards a CCIE. Do you want to do that? And I went, well, not really, because I was going in as like a very experienced engineer, but I'd always worked at small companies where, even though I was working mostly as an SE and an architect, because it was like a small company, I'm talking like 30 people, where the majority of people are technical. The majority of people were technical, very technical, actually. Anything from the knock up to, senior level engineers to architects. They could all, dust off the console cable if they had to, and basically implement or troubleshoot or work on any technology across LAN, WAN, security, wireless, data center. It's just the nature of the company that I was in. And then there was some admin and salespeople, and even the directors, they were technical people who had started a company, and they were CCIE level as well. So I was mainly focused on effectively selling and being an SE and being a trusted advisor to customers. So I wasn't really like implementing projects anymore, and so it didn't really make sense. And that's why I said, I've done the CCDP. I fancy doing the CCDE thing, and I'd looked at it for a couple of years, and anyway, to cut a long story short, we agreed that I would do the CCDE, and they would help with sponsorship as part of my job offer, written into my contract and everything. And that would potentially help towards the CCE or the expert level engineer count, because I think you're allowed 1 CCDE. So if you have, I don't know if it's changed now, but you used to be able to, I think it was, have 3 CCIEs and 1 CCDE, but you wouldn't be able to have any more than 1 CCDE. It was either 1 or 2. So anyway, fast forward, we agreed to this, and that's basically what I've said. It was more aligned. It was more aligned to the type of work that I was doing, going out speaking to customers about most of the time very complex, actually multi-vendor. Although we were a Cisco partner, we also were an Avaya partner. So we worked on their shortest path bridging solution and all that, pioneered that, and one of the pioneers or thought leaders to deploy that in the UK. Certainly, I don't know about Europe, but we were one of the first. Anyway, there was multi technologies, different types of firewalls, and also when we that we sold, and integrating with different types of networks. So you might have like a HP LAN and integrating with a Cisco IWAN, for example. So you used to get all sorts of weird and wonderful things, and we were doing things like HyperFlex as soon as it came out and stuff like that as well. So I just wasn't hands-on enough, like to be focused enough and have the motivation to say, I'm going to get a CCIE in routing and switching and become a guru in OSPF and BGP and EIGRP and spanning tree. It did not align to what I was doing. But I did want, it was a burning desire of mine to have an expert level certification. And this is probably an important one as well. it's a unique certification in the industry. You know, not many people have got it. I think the last count, or unofficial count, I think, was there's something like 450 people. People, not numbers. There's 450 people that have ever achieved it. It might be a bit higher than that now, but I think it came out in something like 2007. So, you know, we've had a good run at it now. And I think CCIE, I don't know when that came out, like sometime in the 90s, I think. And there's about, I don't know what the numbers are up to, about 65,000, maybe more than that now, but that's numbers. So some people have got, you know, multiple CCIEs, but the same number. So this for me was a big one because of what I was doing. I was kind of thinking ahead to my career, and it wasn't. One thing that you'll notice here, that why CCDE, none of these say I want more money, or I want a better job, or, you know, I think that can I think like let me put it this way. I think if you think by going for the CCDE you're going to be inundated with offers of different types of jobs because of it, then sorry, that's probably not going to happen. And if you thought that was the case, sorry if I've burst your balloon, but I can tell you, having had this certification over 3 years, I don't think I could probably count on one hand, and I wouldn't even fill one hand up, the amount of times that somebody has come to me and said, we need a CCDE. That's just not what this certification is going to give you. What it will give you, though, is knowledge. If you do it correctly and you do it with good people around you, what it will give you is a way of thinking that not many other people, you know, approach network design in that way. And I was pretty fortunate with some of the people that I studied with. I'm not really one for name dropping, but you know, there's quite a few sort of senior, well-respected engineers that were in my study group, which I was fortunate to have the opportunity to study with. So that's why the CCDE. I think the message here is that don't pursue it and think you're going to get a massive paycheck or a job off the back of it. What you're going to get is knowledge which is completely different to anything else that you're going to get in the industry. That's just my opinion, but most people who have achieved it or even went down that journey would probably agree with it. So let's talk about my Ccde written approach. To put it into perspective, I started my new job in March 2015. I started studying in May, and when I say studying, you'll see a bit more about what I mean by that in 2015. I then took my first attempt at the written, I think in June 2015, where I failed. And then in July 2015, I passed the written exam. So would I recommend that approach? I started a new job. I agreed officially to commit to an investment, which, you know, from an employer in writing an exam, where, you know, the small print there is that if I left the company or didn't pass the exam, I had to pay it back. So I'm not going to dwell on that, but it's just a consideration. If you ever have that, you really should think about it properly before you commit to it. Then in June 2015, like 6 weeks after I started studying a multitude of technologies that I didn't really know in that much detail, and was probably a bit arrogant about it. Arrogant. I'm not really an arrogant person. That sounds wrong. I'm probably naive is probably the better word. I thought that I had all this experience in design. I felt like I was the man, like, because I was quite senior in the company that I was working with. I felt like I could solve any design problem, and in my day job I could, but there's a difference between that and then having a random technology thrown at you and then being asked a question about it, and then if somebody says, how do I design X technology, and you say this is how you design it, and then somebody turns round to you and says, why would you design it that way and not this way? That why this is one of the cliches in the CCDE. Why is the most difficult question that, like, and sometimes people can get a bit upset and feel offended if somebody says why are you doing it that way, or why would you recommend you do it that way. But it's part and parcel of this certification. If you make a recommendation, you're never going to pass this certification unless, when you make a recommendation on a technology, if you can't explain why you've selected that technology, and be confident why you're recommending that, you're not going to pass this certification. Well, you could make a recommendation, but it could be the wrong recommendation. It needs to be in line with customer requirements and things like that. So let me just clear the annotation off, and I'll just work through my CCD written approach a little bit more. So I did have some knowledge gaps in things, and I've got some examples later on in the presentation of documents that outline the pure scale of technology knowledge that you need to have as well. So it is a design exam. It's a thought process exam. But you do definitely need to know all of the technologies that are in scope to pass both the written and the practical exam, and to be able to compare and contrast the different technologies and solutions. So things like MPLS, TE, QoS. Or do you know how to do QoS, Malcolm? Yeah, I know how to do QoS. I know how to configure a shaper. I know how to do a bit of policing on a CE. But do you know QoS? Go and read the end-to-end QoS book by Tim Ccde. And once you know that book, or there's also a live lessons on Safari, which is basically a video-based version of that book. And there is a lot of repetition in it, but if you don't know that book pretty well, which is a good, I don't even know, I've got it lying around here somewhere, I don't know where, but it's a good maybe 400 or 500 pages, maybe more, of different types of QoS and enterprise, on the CE, on the LAN, in the service provider world, talking about shaping, policing, tail drop, the pipe mode, short pipe mode, all these things that, to be honest, the pipe, the short pipe, and the whatever the other mode is that's in MPLS. Somebody will remind me in the chat, I'm sure. But there's 3 different ways that you uniform. I knew Jacob would know. But yeah, so there's 3 different ways that a service provider can mark your traffic, or police your traffic and things like that, and it affects what you have to do on the CE. And how things are mapped, and how, if markings are changed in transit, and all these things. I never knew that stuff before I started studying. So if you went back a slide, oh no, I took the annotation off, but if you remember that timescale that I put in, like 6 weeks to learn that stuff, it's not long, and that's only QoS. And I'll get onto some of it in a bit more detail as well. So that's what I guess I'm saying here is, like, some of it from scratch, some of it was learning from scratch, and some of it was just, I already had the knowledge of it, but maybe I never done it for 2 years, or I never implemented it in a project for 8 years. I don't know. Maybe I'd done it when I was an entry-level engineer, and I've only done it in, you know, a high-level design since then. So there was definitely a lot of like wake-up calls that it was like, yeah, you know how OSPF works, but yeah, you know how it's configured based on a CCNP level best practice scope, but if you actually have to have multiple redistribution points and multi-area and selecting the right type of area on a DMVPN environment, and why you would select one type of area or why you would even select OSPF, it might not be the best. So it might not be the best practice and the best solution for a DMVPN network, but in the Ccde exam, that doesn't matter. Everything goes out the window and anything's fair game. So you could have the most crazy looking design, and your initial reaction and your human reaction is, well, that can't be right. That's not how you should do it. But the reality is that you're probably going to have to do it, and you have to really think tactical and strategic throughout the whole exam. Bearing in mind it's at least 3 years since I've even looked at the exam, so I've no idea what it looks like now. It might have changed probably the content, but I don't think the approach has changed that much. But I could be wrong on that. So another big one for me was Cisco Live videos. Or I should say, that was a huge resource for me. And just to put it into perspective, I think I had something like, if I can find the file, hang on a second. Study notes. I've still got them all saved. The PDFs from the Cisco Live sessions. So hopefully you can see this. I have a study folder for CCDE. I've still got all the stuff. CCDE study notes, which I'll get onto in a minute, but the PDFs, the Cisco Live sessions, and I didn't just read these PDFs, right? I watched these videos 2 to 3 times each. All right. And you see I've got 48 items here. So I had about 48 to, I'd probably say 60 sessions. I made notes from those sessions, not for all 48 to 60, but probably about 20 to 30. Actually, I've got some. I've put some into the presentation, so I'll go into that in a minute. But yeah, so I made some. That's on the next slide. I'll give some examples of that. So there was also many books, many from like Cisco Press. There was non-Cisco Press books like MPLS Design Fundamentals, I think it was called, and honestly can't even remember. But I used to like read when I woke up in the morning, so at 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. Bearing in mind this is one of the things I would recommend against. I was going to bed at like 1 a.m. after, like, so I had a young family or have a young family. They would all be in bed at 9. At 9 p.m. I would study till anything, maybe just a couple hours, or up till like 1 a.m., 2 a.m. Just thinking that was the right way. And I had a 1 to 2 hour commute each way to my work at the time. So I had to get up at like, 7 o'clock to get to work on time. But I would get up at 5:30, 6 o'clock and do an hour's study. Now that is not the right way to do things, because my day looked something like wake up at 5:30, 6, do some study, have my breakfast, leave the house between 7 and 7:30, get to the office for 9, do 8 hours in the office or at customer sites or whatever, leave the office at 5, get home somewhere around about 7, have my dinner, spend maybe 30 to 60 minutes with my family, and then 9 till 1 study. Like, I wouldn't say every single day, but it was most days. Like, so it was, you could probably generalize it as every single day, but sometimes it was every day, sometimes it was, 2 days, and then at weekends it was just like a complete, like, obsessed with the Ccde. So, many books. I don't have a list of those, so I would need to make a list somehow, somewhere after, to tell you exactly what. But again, I don't know how relevant they would be these days anyway. I think the main book that I loved was Definitive MPLS Designs. The book's from like 2003 or something like that. Oops, 2003. And I think it's got two editions or something. But it's the best book. I loved it. It's got 4 scenarios in it, and it's just perfect. And if you use Safari, then you can highlight the text and get used to the highlighting features and stuff like that, and that you would maybe have in the exam as well. So, and then the INE CCDE course, I mentioned that earlier. That was probably a bit, this isn't really. This is not really like for the written, in my opinion. There is some introductory slides and things like that on the technologies, but I think it's more around about thought process, and it's just more scenarios. That was the other thing that was really lacking when we first started as a study group, was different types of design scenarios. So we talk about that in a little while, but we ended up creating our own and challenging each other on them. So yeah, so but it is something, if you're quite advanced in your studies and you're going for the CCD written, you might want to, and you've got an INE subscription, you might want to just have a look at it anyway. So I mentioned like doing the Cisco Live stuff that I mentioned here. What I would do is have the Cisco Live session playing, and this is the whiteboard from my room, that if you were to see me on camera just now, probably not looking my most flattering, but here I am. Hopefully you can see me. The background's blurred out. But basically, in behind me, there's no point in doing that then. Basically behind me there, that's the same whiteboard. It's in a bit worse condition now than it was then, but this is when I was all really like fresh and enthusiastic, and thought, brilliant, let's get this CCDE done in the next 6 months and fill the expert level slot in the company and get the gold partner status. Didn't really work out like that. You see here that this part up here at the top, and this is me really enthusiastic. It's like that CCIE picture where you see the person is like in a suit, and then they basically look like a caveman at the end of the CCIE journey. That's similar to the CCDE, and that's kind of what I was feeling like. Really upbeat, chirpy. I'm going to do this and be one of few CCDEs and all this kind of thing. And I've got this much design experience, so it shouldn't be that much more effort and things like that. But didn't really pan out. Didn't really pan out like that. So you see, this was my target. I thought I was going to start studying in May and have my CCDE by November. And that was really just to motivate me. Anyway, this session, this is basically the session that Elaine Lopes ran at Cisco Live. I don't think it was BRK 3052. Or maybe I started off on that. But this is basically the CCDE overview that they do every year. or they did do every year back then. So what basically I took down here is like, they started talking about different things. I think up this top left-hand corner, I started doing some whiteboarding because I was just getting my head round how I was going to do it. But then you see we've got scenarios, best prep, exam scoring, optimal, suboptimal. So that's they were talking about things like, you might get partial if there's two options for you to pick and you pick the suboptimal one, you might get partial scoring. And then there might be some unscored questions, and then just some more about the scoring methodology. And then this was everything. So I had this session playing and I stood up in my room and I was basically had my back to the presentation and I was listening to what they were saying and turning round. And I took all these notes in shorthand about what it was all about. So there's stuff about the simulations, the hotspot questions, the drag and drop, the design life cycle, design use cases, and then up here they had a slide on the different topics, the technical topics. So layer 2 and all the spanning tree, fate sharing, resilience. And I kind of took this from the objectives or the blueprint as well. But they had this up on the screen. So we had layer 3, all the routing protocols, breaking them down, RIP version 2. And this slide was basically me setting the stall out saying, this is everything that I need to learn for the CCDE. And this is these are what Cisco are telling me about, what's actually going to be in the exam, what the questions are going to look like. And, there's even things in here, if I zoom in, it's talking about like the branch and the parent questions. So you might get asked a question. Again, I've no idea if this is still the same. And this is on a Cisco Live presentation open to the public. I'm not sharing anything under NDA here. But, for example, if you get asked a question and it's like, what solution do you pick? And A or B, and you pick A, and it's correct. And then the next question might be justify why you pick A. And if you don't get that justification question correct, then you get no points for those two questions. So there's lots of different ways that you can obtain points, partial scoring, unscored questions. They also said that some of the optimal versus suboptimal multi-point questions, you might get a few points or whatever. But it's just an absolute minefield. But I suppose that's what makes it so difficult. So that was the overview whiteboard. This one here is just, I've got another few just to show you that the level of detail that I was going into. And just to be clear, aside from these whiteboard notes, I didn't really do notes in OneNote back then because I was a bit old school. I hand wrote everything. And I've got about 2 A4 pads full of notes on different protocols, designs, decision tables, things like that. But to talk about this one, here is the session number. I put the session numbers for BRK 2310 OSPF and large scale networks. Played the video in the background and listened to it, and then, as they moved through the presentation, started like capturing what they were talking about. And some of this might not even have been. I remember I was on a call and I shared a slide like this, maybe not this particular one, but I shared a slide like this with one of my study buddies, and they said, "Oh, that bit there is incorrect." And I went, "Well, it's shorthand. It's my method of taking notes, and that's the approach that I've taken. It's not, I've not really shared it to be like marked up or down. I've basically started the path up by watching Cisco Live presentations, and I'm taking the information from there." But that leads me to the point is like where if somebody in your study group or something points something out to you, don't get offended by it. At the start, it can be annoying. If you're like me, you probably don't like getting criticised in any way because you're good at your job, and I'm sure you are all good at your job. So you're not used to probably somebody like pointing out, you're wrong here, Malcolm. Even if it's like unintentional, you've got it from somewhere else. Those are the kind of fine lines that are between like passing the CCDE and not passing the CCDE. Those small details and knowing which are correct. And like if you get like a massive decision table or a tick box table and you pick the wrong option, then pick the wrong option. Somebody leaving. All good. If you pick the wrong option, it might be that thing that you just didn't understand in either a book or a presentation or whatever. So let's just move to the next slide. So that was just an example of, that was an example of OSPF. So you see him covering different things like OSPF and a service provider network up here, full mesh, overload bits, flood reduction, and things like that. But just because I've done it this way, it doesn't mean to say you need to. This is just how I approached it. Here's another example of network. So session number up the top, and again, you pick how you want to organise your notes. You might just be in OneNote, or now you might have like a Surface Book or something that you just take your notes there. Whereas I've done it a bit old school. But you see here that we're talking about network virtualization. We're talking about like VRFs, E-line services, VRF Lite, Lisp, IPVPN, MPLS over MGRE, MPLS over GRE, how the labels, the RFCs, this stuff down here, the different RFCs. And so this is really just to jog your memory on what you actually need to go away and think about. So VRF Lite questions and things like that. Hierarchical QoS and overlay networks, stuff like that. So that's an example of a network virtualization. Note taken. Here's some stuff on QoS. So this is both. This is mainly enterprise QoS. So this stuff up here. Let me change the color to green. It's a bit easier, but this stuff up here that I just highlighted. Somebody asking to annotate, but I don't think they meant it. So the stuff up the right hand side that I just highlighted in green, that's like mapping, like for example, a 4-class model into an 8-class model, and you're going to need to definitely know how to or know how to approach mapping different like QoS classes into each other, and based on like the application characteristics. So the old RFC 4594 is going to be no doubt important in your CCDE journey. Another example, this is the last one. So this was one of my weak subject matters, and it was basically redundancy mechanisms in L2 VPN. So we're talking about this is the session number up here, and again, it's just how I do it. You might do it slightly different, but we're talking about things like rep, multi-chassis LACP, the DHD, dual home devices, and then ICCP, things like that. And to be honest, when I'd done the exam, that was too low level. I don't know. I think I done a CCD. Well, I done a written exam of some kind, and I remember seeing ICCP mentioned, but I can't even remember if it was a correct answer or not. But it was probably overkill for the CCDE when I done it. But you see, like some pretty advanced stuff like IP route watch. So I say it's a key feature, but that's like, again, I've got my back turned to the presentation. They're talking about things in a Cisco Live presentation. So this doesn't mean to say that it was relevant to the CCDE. I just took L2 VPN and I tried to cover every base that I could. If I zoom in on some of this stuff, coupled and decoupled pseudo wires, VPLS, hybrid, hierarchical VPLS, EVPN, PBB, EVPN, MAC flushing with L2 VPN, BFD, and how that integrates into everything. So, I've got probably about 20 of these notes that are notes like that. And you might or might not want to do that yourself. But I found it helpful. So that pretty much wraps up, and basically in a nutshell, that I found that the CCDE written exam was more around about understanding technology. So I found that when I absolutely hammered these subject matters for I think it was about 12 weeks or something, just like living and breathing it. And when I say subject matters, if I go back to this slide, it was basically all this stuff down the right hand side. I lived and breathed all that stuff. It wasn't really also, this stuff down here. So the technology domains, that's taken straight from a slide on one of the CCDE presentations that Elaine done back in the day. But I found that was enough to pass the CCDE written at the second attempt. And that was my approach. I didn't have any discussions with anybody. I was a lone ranger at this point. I was just doing my own thing, watching my videos, reading my books, and didn't really have much of a strategy, to be honest. I just thought I would read as many things as I could and watch as many videos as I could, and then I somehow passed it, right? So now that was out of the way. If there's any questions on the written, out of interest, who's passed the written on this call? Have many of you passed it already? Not seeing anybody in the chat, so I'm sure a few of you have passed it already, but I don't know. It was difficult for me, and it's probably changed loads since I've done it, because I passed it in about 20. I passed it early in my study, and I never had to sit it again, thankfully. But yeah, I passed it in about, as I say, July 2015, and I never passed the practical till August 2017, the end of August. So let's talk about this, right? So don't really want to dwell on this one because I'm a proud person, and I don't like talking about failure. But let's just say I did fail the exam a few times. It wasn't excessive, but I did have a few failures, and I think there's some things that I can pass on to you and advice that I can pass on to you to maybe help you prepare a bit better than I did. So attempt one, basically, what I was talking about when I was talking about the timelines, that's probably the biggest issue, or the timelines and the pressure to obtain an expert level certification because of the work. Because one thing I will say that I've not actually got in the slides, but I would say if you're going for the CCDE, I don't mean like keep it completely to yourself, but I wouldn't shout about it from the rooftops because it adds like so much pressure to you. I had people in the workplace and they were only being nice, but like when they knew that I was sitting the lab exam, because I had to travel to even attempt it, I would come back into the office, know that I'd failed, and then like you could either tell that people were treading on eggshells around you because they didn't want to like upset you or annoy you, or they would just be completely oblivious as to what this meant in the bigger scale of things to you. So they would be like, oh, how did you get on with the exam? And you're just like, right, failed it. Don't talk to me. That's that's just how I am. I don't know, like maybe other people are a bit like different natured to me, but I took it hard when I failed the CCD because I expected myself to pass it, rightly or wrongly. It's just setting high expectations for myself. I expected to pass it. So with this one, I went basically from May to November and then passed the written in between. That is the wrong way to do it. You will never pass the CCDE. Well, I'd never say never, because I'm sure somebody's done it somehow. But the everyday student is not going to start studying in May and pass the exam, the written and the practical in November. That was naive to even attempt that, and probably a bit stupid, to be honest. And it annoys me to this day because, you know, I just thought I was going to pass it because I'd passed the written and I thought I was more or less there, but I wasn't anywhere near. But the funny thing is, I actually got probably just less than 60% in that. But the truth be told, I don't think it was 60% because I was really close. I think it was just 60% because I happened to. I wasn't even at the races, as we say. So at attempt 2 and 3, were within sort of 6 to 9 months after my first attempt, and I didn't. I seemed to get stuck at this 60%, which seems to be a common thing. And I didn't know, I was getting sick of it. I didn't know what I was doing wrong because I felt like at this stage I knew all the technology. I'll talk a bit more about the approach in the next slide that I used, because I think the approach that I was using was correct, but it was partly getting fixated on, so you'd get asked a question in the exam and then I'd like fixate on the answer. So I'd be like, if it was like question A, B, C, D, and I'd counted out D and A, and then it was like out of these two, I'd agonise on one question for 5 minutes, and like you've only got like, I think it works out to something like 1.5 to 2 minutes per question. But obviously, if you then answer a question in 10 seconds, you've got 1 minute 20 added to your overall time. And if you do that times 10, you've got 10 minutes, 20 seconds extra. So that's how your time builds up. So the low hanging fruit questions that are like, what do you think you should do, A or B? And then it's easy, and you know, like, but sometimes you can be too quick. But if you're pretty confident and you're like, right, it's A, then you just go for it. So let me clear the ink. So that was a bad approach. Then I got stuck at the 60% for a couple of attempts. And then what happened in about November 2016 is there was some, let's just say, suspect and erratic behaviour on how many people were passing for such a difficult exam. Something like, I don't know, 30 people or something passed in one attempt, and it was normally around about 30 people passed per year over 4 separate exams. So I can't remember whether that was, yeah. So that, I think that was in November 2016, and then what happened was I basically ended up between I failed in I think November 2016, which was one of these attempts, and then I said I took a 9-month break, but I only took a 9-month break from sitting exams. What I actually done was, and I'll cover it more in the next slide, is I really buckled down and focused my studies, and I changed the way I was doing things. So I'll talk about that, which leads me to, in my opinion, it's not possible to brute force this exam. So I don't know. I don't know what the CCIE is like, but I gather based on what I see around the internet, if you keep on going for the CCIE, like depending on how much study you put in for it, you're going to get a better and better idea as to how what you're going to need to configure, right? With the CCDE, in my opinion, it's not like that. Like it could be completely different exam every time you go. It could be different scenarios. It could be the same scenario with different questions. Who knows what's happening with it now? But it's more like, I think, instead of like learning how to configure a protocol, it's more based on, the responsibility gets passed on to you as a network designer to make a decision based on the information that you've got available to you. So rather than saying, a binary answer, this or this, it's more around analytical thinking, and also the process, being able to read extremely quickly, but whilst also taking the information in. And that was something that I struggled with as well, because I'm not a fast reader, and I had to actually work on my reading skills, to be honest. Probably don't have time to cover it in this particular session, because I'm looking at the time and we're just about an hour in from when we started. But what I would do is I would go onto Safari Books, and then I would use the highlighting function there. So I would say, let's say there's a word there, but this is like, well, let's say this is like paragraphs, right, of multiple words. Let me see if I can get a highlighter, right? I think this will work. Oh, that didn't. Or maybe I can do it here. Right, this is, if I use the words as an example, right? So I would use the highlighting function and just look for the text turning yellow in this second last bullet point down at the bottom. So where it says it is not possible to brute force this exam. So what I would do is, like, if I was relating this in Safari Books and say it was talking about a technical thing, I would say, right, not possible brute force exam. So this is like a and then maybe say next time, right? So I would get into the habit of highlighting words, but bearing in mind this might be like a huge paragraph of text. But what I basically look at here is, like, say, not possible brute force exam next time. So if I read it the first time, right, and again I just highlight a few words, and then I can tie the words together by just going looking at not possible brute force exam. It's not possible to brute force this exam. That's a skill that you need to be able to have. You absolutely have to be able to do it. But it might be like, I can't even think of an example. If I had a book up on the screen, I'd be able to demonstrate it better. But hopefully that makes sense. You need to be able to read fast, highlight only what you need to like a few words in a paragraph to tie the paragraph together, but only if that paragraph is relevant. So you could have like 5 or 6 paragraphs that waffle on about nothing really that important, but you still use the same technique from a reading perspective. So you might say, let's say that took 9 months break was a paragraph. You could read over it in your head and say, took 9 months break, that's not relevant, and then just not highlight anything. But then if you then went to the next line or the next paragraph and it's like, it's not possible to brute force the exam, you're like, all right, that's quite relevant maybe for if I get asked a question on it. So you highlight, like, 3 words that tie the paragraph or the relevant part of the paragraph together, which might be technical information. So I suppose that's more of a general tip on your methodology. But fast reading and being able to understand things quickly, but also remember it. The other way, there's some people that have actually read the exam and not even used the highlighter. And then there's some other people who have used the highlighter and they've said technical constraints are in pink and commercial constraints are in blue and, requirements are in green. And that to me is just, it can burn a lot of your time. Going back to this point here, the reason that I say that you've got to be able to perfect that is because my first probably 2 or 3 attempts, I was reading every single word because I had in my head, like, I want to do, like, because I'm so detail orientated in my job, I was like, I want to make sure I do a good job here. Scrap that. See, when you go into the Ccde exam, forget about the customer's feelings and what they want and all the rest of it. Focus on the question. Focus on the question and what's relevant to the question. And don't read every single detail because that's how you burn time. You've only got 2 hours per scenario and sounds a long time, but it's not. And I think, like, I was doing things like spending 40 minutes reading the documentation. And then that leaves you an hour and 20 minutes to answer 35 pretty technical or very technical questions where you have to then go back to the documentation sometimes and find the answer. So you need to find a system that works for you to interpret the information, capture the information, and know where to go and find that information. So that's on the exam, preparation for the exam and in the exam. You could talk for hours a bit more about that, but we don't have hours tonight, unfortunately. So this is the more like, leading up to my pass, right? This is pretty much what I done. So I think after I failed my second attempt, I joined a study group with probably 10 to 15 of the highly respected network people in the world, even now, and the majority of them are now CCDEs. And we all passed at different times. Some passed after 6 months, some passed after 12 months, some passed after 18 months, some passed after 1 attempt, some passed after multiple attempts. But we're talking, like, I think I was I was pretty much the only person in the group that didn't have a CCIE. And that was a bit like, I went through the whole imposter syndrome. But that said, I also had, at this point, 9 or 10 years, or maybe about 9 years designing networks, where some of the other people might have had multi CCIEs, but they were quite early on the, the design track, especially at an expert level. And some people were actually service provider experts who had done very little enterprise stuff. And some folk don't like saying, there's enterprise and service provider because they say all technologies are just there to be used. But the reality of it is that an enterprise engineer, an engineer who works in an enterprise environment has probably never, ever done RSVP TE or MPLS L2 VPN because they would just use an overlay like OTV or something like that for L2 VPN, and they just wouldn't use RSVP TE. That would be RSVP maybe for voice stuff 20 years ago or 15 years ago. But come on, like let's be realistic. So and by the same token, service provider experts or engineers or whatever you want to call them, they've probably done very little like LAN configuration in an enterprise, or played about with HSRP timers, and they've probably done stacks at OSPF and IS to IS, but maybe not in a multi area OSPF design for an enterprise. So there's definitely in the version of the exam that I done, and I don't know if it's going to change the exam or how it's going to change or when it's going to change. But as things stand now, as far as I believe, there is a heavy focus on traditional service provider and enterprise routing and switching technologies, and you have to be, pretty up to speed with that stuff. I've got a few example documents that I can go through at the end. So what did we do? I joined the study group. We had 3-hour weekly sessions every single Saturday, and they had 10 to 15 people on them every single Saturday. We also talked on Slack at the time every single day. So we had different channels for MPLS, I don't know. I've got an example of the different technology areas, but basically we had loads of different channels. So if you wanted to talk about security, or if you wanted to talk about MPLS, or if you wanted to talk about IGP, there was a channel for it. And we were on that every day. But every day, every Saturday, absolutely every Saturday, 3 hours. I think it was 11 a.m. my time till 2 p.m. my time, which worked with Canada and US Eastern, which were about 5 or 6 hours behind. The same people every single week turned up. We struggled initially to find scenarios because, again, this is going back to 2016, and there was hardly any material really available on LeanPub or anything like that. Obviously, there's more now. So, like people like Martin Dugan has like a few scenarios and things like that. But back then, there was only really like Marwan's book, Jeremy Philibin's scenarios, Orhan was starting to sort of break through into the industry. And that was it. That's all there really was. So we ended up writing our own scenarios. So each people would have, it was like we were a design team, but we didn't work in the same company. It's like we were an architecture/design team, and we put responsibility on each other to deliver things by Saturday and sometimes Sundays as well. So if a group of the people, if there was 14, 15 people in the group, and 3 of them were taking the November or the February attempt, we would step it up as a team and all join on a Saturday and a Sunday to support the people. And we also done something like 8-hour marathons, I guess, times 5 days. So that would be the people that were actually attempting the exam that would do this. And they would maybe take a week off work and every single day just talk for 8 hours. And it wasn't like do an exam or do a scenario. It was like, let's just talk through stuff. So it was training our mind to basically concentrate for 8 hours. We also wrote blueprints on the different technologies. I've got some examples of that. And then for me, what got me over the line was doing labs. I never done that at the start. I'd done that in the lead up to the final attempt, and I owe this man, who was my main study buddy, as well as like all the other people. But basically, what happened was the study group people started passing. So in regards to quite understandably, they'd had enough of it. Like coming every Saturday and Sunday, and you wouldn't expect somebody who'd passed the exam to keep turning up. But the numbers started reducing, and then it was only really Igor and myself that were still attending, and then people were saying they were going to attend, and then they never. So, and then that meant that, these blueprints that we had agreed were going to be ready for the Saturday, the system was falling apart. So Igor and I decided in 2016 that we were just going to study together. And what we'd done was a hell of a lot of labs and broke all of the technologies down. Yeah, I'll talk about that a bit more if I have time. but he's now also CCD certified, and he passed maybe 9 months or 12 months after I passed. But he was already a CCIE, but he passed after I passed. Yeah, Igor, yeah, Mohammed, you know him. He's a good guy, really good guy. So I think I've already talked about this, but these are my main resources. These are my main resources. Then I'm going to show you a couple of the things that I've done, and then I'll wrap it up after that. So I used, because service provider stuff was my sort of area for improvement. I used the CCIE SP Advanced Technologies course for INE version 4. Brian McGann, and also I actually also used 3.0 because that had a PDF download, which just made it a bit easier. I done some labs and stuff. So Jeremy Philibin, Jeremy was a mentor to me throughout the whole process. As many practice scenarios as possible. So those were home-baked and commercial. So for example, like Jeremy's and Martin Dugan's, and then create your own, but make them wacky. Don't make them like, what do you want to pick, OSPF or EIGRP? You have to make them crazy. So the sorts of things that, just to give you an idea, like, and that related to the lab stuff that Igor and I done. So we done stuff like, right, do you want to, let's build a lab and build it from the ground up. So we started with one AS, right, running IS to IS as the IGP, and then IBGP, VPN, V4. And then we got all that good stuff working. And then what we done is we built AS2 with, OSPF, IBGP, and what we done is we broke ISIS as much as we could. So we didn't really do like at CCIE level, like really deep dive packet capture stuff, but we would do stuff like break the IS to IS infrastructure by enabling and disabling multi-topology, and then transition. There's various like different configurations in IS to IS that will actually break the design. Like for example, if you want to run IPv4 and IPv6 concurrently and switching wide metrics on and off and things like that, just break the design. So we started off like focusing on one protocol, then layering things on top. And back then we just done it in GNS3 with Cisco 7200 router image. Once we had, and then we added CEs in and things like that. What we then done is we created InterAS, ABC with like root reflectors and things like that. And then what we done is we ran OSPF and then created like a sham link. And then IPv6, so 6 PE, 6 VPE, and yeah, I mean, we basically created like the worst network you could ever imagine. I think one of the things that we even done was we ran RSVP. We created RSVP traffic engineering tunnels over a statically routed environment. So these are the types of things that we done, and it was brilliant because I absolutely 100% can tell you that's what got me over the line. Because I understood the theory of all the technologies, but it was when you got to, the decision tables that looked like this, and select 3 from here and 4 from here and 5 from here. and you'd be like, oh, right. But, you'd hum and haw about which ones you should select. After I'd done that labbing for 9 months, we done that, Igor and I. And after I'd done that, I was like, right, cool. You're asking me about this. That's going to be this one, and this one. Next, you're asking me for the next question. That's going to be this one and this one. And I was so confident that I knew what if this was the tech options up here, I was confident that I knew, like, this was the answer, and, all of these ones here were just wrong, basically. And that gave me the confidence. And again, people say, oh, well, you don't need to know how to, like, configure stuff. I think that you do. You just maybe don't need it, like, to the CCIE low-level packet capture type level, but you definitely need to know how to implement this stuff, in my opinion. So we had different scenarios that we created. Some of them were things that we bought, and we made a schedule of, like, when we were covering different scenarios and things like that. INE had the scenarios, but also the this stuff that I talked about up here. Safari, I don't know how many books are in my Safari queue. Like, basically all the Cisco Press stuff you can find on IPv6, MPLS, and I'm talking about old stuff as well. Optimal routing design, all the golden oldies that from Russ White and all these legends in the industry. They're all still, or for my exam, they were all still relevant. I bought Orhan's stuff. I done a few things from his course, so he had some good, like, mind maps, and I didn't attend any of his, like, instructor-led course, because again, this comes back to, you can see how many resources that you've got, and you also have to create your own stuff. You can just get lost in it. And I'd already, to be honest, been working, with Jeremy and things like that, and I just didn't want to buy too much stuff, to be honest. But Orhan definitely had some stuff of value in his self-study materials. Martin Dugan, near the end, yeah, definitely his I can't remember whether he released his exams before or after I passed, but I peer reviewed one of his exams, actually, and it was it was really good. They're on Lean Pub. And I think they're only about, I don't know what they are in your local currency, but they're cost effective, so they're like £50 or something for an exam. And then Nick Russo, who's a good friend of mine as well, I used his CCIE Service Provider 2,000-page book, but I didn't, I completely hold my hands up to say that's not really, like, a massive factor in me passing the CCDE. It was more like, I really need to understand this specific part about service provider technology. That's where I would go for certain, certain technology subject matters. So just let me just put up a couple of things, right? So I talked about things that I created myself, right? Here is a scenario that I created myself, and this was just, like, for discussion. So created, like, and it's not really, it was a document work is in progress, but it was something to talk about. So it's like a design document, an overview and a background. What are your consultancy requirements? And you wouldn't probably get stuff that was this explicit. Recommend routing protocols. This is exactly what you need to do. But we talked about this in in some discussions. And here's, like, the business and the technical requirements, which there's many of them, but this isn't really how the exam is laid out, but it was just a different way of approaching it. And then the existing network, this is what it looks like, bit of a mess, a load of text, which in the exam, if you've sat it already, you'll know that that's like kind of common. And then more stuff about the existing management network, how the network actually operates. This is what they want to get to, and then here's like the data center, zoomed in on the data center. Here's zoomed in even further on the data center. Here's the WAN connectivity. And, I was building this up into like a wider, a bigger scenario, talking about, interconnects and the core network and things like that. And there's like loads of text, and then created like some, what the exam kind of looks like, but the same but different, I suppose. But it's building something up from scratch that again, so for me personally, I think it was like the labs that got me over the line, but for some other people it was doing something like this. And I only got so far with it, but at least it gave me some kind of background into doing it for myself. The frameworks on the technology framework, so in your study group, this is the sort of thing that we would do. So you see here, Saturday the 18th of June 2016, this is what 10 to 15 people, so we would say like, this is a BGP technology session. So this is about understanding BGP as a group, challenging each other. And just because I wrote the framework document doesn't mean to say that I'm not teaching the rest of the class. Just my responsibility was for Saturday morning to have this framework ready. So first of all, talk about the protocol, then talk about use cases in the enterprise, then the service provider, BGP. So focused on BGP, talking about different address families, path selection, attributes or common attributes, how to scale BGP, meshes, route reflectors, confederations, and then a break, hot potato routing, all these things that you're probably going to get thrown at you in the exam. And again, this is just BGP. So if you think back to that first slide and multiply this by the amount of different technologies and protocols that are in scope, multipath, shadow sessions, shadow route reflectors, convergence considerations, PIC, best external, how the IGP impacts convergence, security, and then some design examples. And we would have like, I don't have any of the diagrams, but we've done diagrams and things. So we just put a diagram up on the screen and be like, right, let's talk about this design. So we're just about to hit 9:30 here, but I'm happy to just keep going just to finish things off. And if you need to drop or whatever, that's fine. The session's recorded, so it'll be up at some point somewhere. So what else? Here's like a layer 2. So it was the same format every time, right? Where we might take stuff from like Cisco Live presentations. So we would send this out. This is the framework. So this is the layer 2 and layer 2 tunneling framework, 30th of July 2016. So I've only got the ones that I prepared. So this was like talking about the technology. So OTV, some stuff, fast failure detection. So, and then this is where you start seeing the interdependencies between the protocol. So we're talking about OTV, but now we're talking about BFD integrating and first hop FHRP, so HSRP, VRRP localization, things that you would see, multicast support, and this is all standard OTV design, and then how Lisp might integrate into it. And that's just OTV. Then we talked about VXLAN. So some of us were learning VXLAN at this time because, as I say, it's going back to 2016, and VXLAN at that time was completely out of scope for the Ccde, but we still covered it. And then you talk about MTU and things like that. Q&Q, that was probably quite relevant at the time. L2TP version 3. Rep, and then it would be like any other business. So these frameworks were typically prepared ahead of like a 3-hour session. And this is just another like short scenario that I put. I mentioned at the start that, you know, I worked at a construction company at the start of my career. So this was heavily based on working there and the challenges that, you know, they fixed. And the reason for the terrible formatting is because if any of you have sat the CCD practical, this is what you're going to be faced with. And what I was talking about before, what you might be like is like, see what I was talking about earlier on, you might have all this down to here and none of it is relevant. But you might say, actually, I just want to say MPLS L3 VPN. And then, I don't know, like I'm making it up on the fly here, IPsec VPN clients. And then, oh, what else? They say remote access. So I'm just completely making this up because I can't even remember what I wrote in this design. But this is the sort of thing that I would say, instead of going like this and highlighting that, if you do the second thing that I've done there, you would probably be like, right, what's relevant? Because you have to read this whole sentence. Whereas what you really want to strive for is saying MPLS L3 VPN, IPsec, remote access. We've got MPLS L3 VPN and IPsec for remote access. And then the rest of that paragraph, you still read it, but as long as you're confident that that covers everything that you need to know, if you go back to that document and you get a question on remote access, you would probably look for remote access and then say, you know, tie it together. So it's not a very detailed example, but it's more about, you know, approach and methodology. So that's about the frameworks and the documentation. Got a few more things just to give an example of. This is something that I started and I never completed, but it will give you an idea of the scope of technologies in the CCDE or that were in scope. So I created a spreadsheet, which is technology detail worksheet. So this is layer one, and I've basically, you know, put description, use case, pros, cons, dependencies, and deployment detail. So if there's any, you know, things that you need to know about dependencies on other protocols or technologies, you know, the idea was that you would fill in all these, or I would fill in all these for every single technology. It's a bit more interesting and populated as we move along. So we move on to layer two. So, you know, forget this. This isn't layer two. I've obviously copied and pasted, but OTV, description, what is it? Dependencies, deployment detail, rep, what is it? Dependencies, use cases, pros, cons, and I never quite got, but these were, and then I've split it into different sections. So service provider, dual homing. So all that stuff that I was talking about in the layer two presentation at the start of the presentation, you know, dual home devices between ICCP, between PEs, which was all irrelevant for the exam anyway, but yeah. Then you start moving into stuff that I focused on a bit more. So IGP, OSPF. So you see here, for example, you know, the different topologies. So you've got meshed OSPF, neighbor broadcast, NBMA neighbors, OSPF point to point, point to multi-point, full mesh, and then you start talking about flood reduction and things like that. And then I move into like areas, route summarization, and topology hiding. So general stub area usage. What is it? What's a use case? What's the pros? What's the cons? And you see, I never quite finished it off, but you know, I had a good go at it. And I think one of the reasons that I never finished it off is because I had too much stuff. I had so many books. I had like my weekly calls. I had my labs going. I had you know, Jeremy's stuff. I had so many scenarios. I was living in MPLS definitive MPLS designs. That book. But you see here, like for, you know, I didn't even really get started on IS, but I've got a hell of a lot of notes elsewhere on all this stuff as well. BGP stuff, MPLS stuff, splitting it into categories and things like that. You see the sheer amount of stuff just on MPLS VPN, unified MPLS. And again, I'm not really talking about here any configuration stuff. This is just what is it, use case, pros, cons, what's it dependent on, or what are the dependencies, and what's a high level approach to implementing it. Same for QoS, tunneling and VPN, that's repetition, I suppose. IPv6, oh man, transition mechanisms in IPv6. I'm not even going to go there. So good luck with that part if you're still to cover it. But and then multicast. Again, some of this is in red because I wasn't quite sure at the time if I was correct. I just wanted to populate it. So we cover all, IGMP version 1, 2, 3, PIM, ASM, SSM, BIDR, and then focus in on specific things to do with ASM, BIDR, multicast redundancy with MSDP, Anycast, source-specific multicast, how that works. And then data center design, what else have we got? Network management, and then, again, a bit half-hearted on the diagrams, but you can imagine how much time it takes to fill something like that in. So that's probably a contributing factor as to why I never got to it. And what else have I got? So things like, just to get into the design mindset, I suppose, like RFIs, so request for information, just mocking up. Like if you were in a design meeting, and I cover this on some of the design courses that I'm doing now. Request for information, but it's basically putting the questions back on the customer. So you're asking them to provide you the information so that you've then got it documented and you can formulate your design. So this is all around about, instead of somebody telling you something and saying, okay, I'll go and do that, challenging it. And also for when you're going away and doing something, somebody challenging you, that's important. And you being able to deal with that and not get offended or upset or think that someone's being, a bit of a not very nice to you, let's say. So that's some of the documentation that we prepared, and that's mainly my stuff. But the other folk in the team. So just to kind of like, this slide and then one more, and then that's us done. And then I'll open it up to any questions. So advice and battle scars, right? I think personally you need to go deep on the technologies, but once you understand them, then you think about them at a higher level. So don't think about them as an implementer. Think about them as a designer and how they interact with each other. But I think in order to understand that, you need to lab. Not everything. If you're good at stuff already, you don't need to. There's no point in just like going over stuff that you know inside out. But if there's new stuff and you've got the capability in a rack or a lab or a server or something at home, just do it with 4 or 5 routers or 4 or 5 devices. That's the thing that our team basically kept on saying is just lab it up, but do it with 4 or 5 devices. You don't need like a 20, 30 router lab for a CCIE type level lab to learn something. You just need 4 or 5 devices. Be open-minded. I've already covered that, so don't get offended or just get used to people questioning why. And once you know the approaches and the technologies and things like that in a lot more detail, then you'll get used to it and you just answer the question. Have good people around you, so don't try and do this on your own. That's my advice, because that's part of my biggest issue at the start. I had no CCIE. I'm not sure if that was the smartest move. I was confident in my ability and I got there in the end, and I had enough design experience, but I think that it's more around about if you've been through a CCIE and you've been through the process, and you know what it's all about, and you know the level of difficulty that something's going to be, I think it would help. It's not like if you've got a CCIE, it's easier, because most people who have a CCIE and go for the CCDE say, it's totally different exam. It's completely different. Like there's nothing to say because you've got a CCIE that it's going to be any easier. But I personally think that it's the stuff that comes along with the CCIE, like the pressure, the lab environment, the 8 hours, the managing your time, and also managing your study on the lead up to it, I think is important, or probably would benefit people. What's this one? The reason I mention this, it's not so much about the tech. That's what I just explained. If you've got a family, be prepared to miss out on some stuff. If you do have a family, you're going to be spending a lot of time studying. I had a couple of things where I was on these calls and these sessions with the team, and my kid was like watching like Fireman Sam and Peppa Pig in the background and shouting, "Daddy, I want a glass of milk," and things like that. But that's life. You've got to work around that if you've got kids and family. And another one was, the other things, I've got a season ticket for my football or soccer team, I should say, for the Americans if there's anyone. But yeah, football team, and I would like be on a WebEx call in the car, albeit just listening. But I would be on a call, park up the car, and then I'd be walking down to the stadium with my kid, with my earphones in, still on the call. Finished at 2, sometimes 3 o'clock, and our games kicked off at 3 o'clock, and I would be on the call right until that time or just before. And then I even remember driving my son back from one of his friends' 3-year-old birthday party, where the call started when I took him, and then I didn't want to be rude, like being on the call. But as soon as I got back in the car, I dialed back onto the WebEx, and for the last 25 to 30 minutes of the call, I was on a WebEx call with the team, like listening in, albeit, and commenting here and there. But it's just mad when I'm not saying that's the way you should do it. That's the way I done it, and I don't think I actually done it in the most efficient way at times. Also, sometimes it takes time for things to sink in. So I would like drill myself on a subject matter over and over and over and over and over, thinking if I keep going at this, I'm going to understand it, or I'm going to get it. Get things. And sometimes it just wasn't sinking in. I could not grasp some concepts of certain technologies, but it's like I thought, oh, persistence pays off. It doesn't. It's really, really difficult, for to use that approach and for it to work in your brain, especially if you've got an intense day and you're doing your day job and you've got travel and things like that. Not so much in these times with COVID and everything, but it's tough. It's tough, and sometimes I found that if I went away from something for 2 weeks and then I went back to it, and I'm like, I understand that. Why? What was so hard about that? So that's what I would say on that particular scenario. So that's the advice in the battle scars. The one that we always get asked about is always gets mentioned is the implementation questions because it's like you have option 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sometimes you have like 7 or 8, and 6 might be first, 2 might be last, and it's like, how do you approach this? And I was on a call with like some of my friends in the study group who haven't like passed, or hadn't passed at the time, I should say, and they were like, "What about the implementation questions, Malcolm? How did you get around that?" And I said, like, well, as you know, I was a bit rusty on the old implementation because I'd been working in an SE role. Although I had a lot of experience as an engineer, I hadn't done as much of it recently, and I more got involved in escalations as an advisory when I had TAC escalations and things like that. But a way to simplify it is to think, always remember this, right? Pre-provision, cut over, then decommission. So when you've got all these tasks, and when I said this, when you've got all these tasks and you've got no idea, like it can be like, it can look really, really complicated. But see if you just remember pre-provision, cut over, decommission. What's pre-provision? Pre-provision is, what can I do before I actually make, a switch in technology that's not going to break the network. So pre-provision isn't going to be like pulling the LAN cable from a router. That would be cut over. Pre-provision would be something like, getting overlay tunnels up prior to a cutover, but not routing the traffic into the new tunnels, keeping them going over either the existing network or existing tunnel or whatever. And then cut over would be, actually swinging the routing over to the new environment, and then decommission. When you explain it like this, it sounds really easy, but when you're in the middle of the CCDE exam and you've got these questions or these options, and you've got a myriad of options to choose from, it's not that easy, especially when that clock's ticking down. And if, for example, you're past your 2 hours for your first scenario, and you're 2 hours and 10 minutes, and then you start thinking, things become really difficult when you start getting into that situation. So pre-provision, cut over, decommission for the implementation questions, and I think that's a good place to finish on, because I don't have anything else for you.